Maise Shehoya Bevilne. Reb Chaim Volozhiner was Mesader Kiddushin, and the name of the Kala was Bat-Sheva. And Reb Chaim Volozhiner had a question whether or not to write in the Ksuba the name Bat-Sheva as two separate names, Bas and Sheva, or to write it as one full, whole name, Bat-Sheva. We know that the Shemas in the Ksuba are extremely vital and important. If somebody makes a mistake in the name of the Ksuba, then they have to rewrite the Ksuba once again. And when Reb Chaim Volozhiner had this story, he was mesuper how to write the name Bat-Sheva. And as the minig in the Beis HaKnesses in the Klois in Vilna, all the chuppahs and kiddushin took place in the Chatzar Beis HaKnesses, in the courtyard of the shul. And the Goyen's house, anybody who was ever in Vilna knows, was next door. Chaim Volozhiner walked off the chuppah and walked into the Goyen's house, and he asked him, what should he do? And the Goyen answered him, Tomachti Yeseidoisai Bishloish Esre Tevos, which is a part of the Slichis, the Nusach HaSlichis, we say Tomachti Yeseidoisai Bishloish Esre Tevos. But Reb Chaim Volozhiner, for a moment, as he stated, was puzzled and did not understand what his Rebbe is answering him. It took him a few moments, and then he happened. And he referred himself to the Gemara in Sanhedrin, Daf Chov Beis Amud Aleph. The Gemara says, everybody knows the story we read in the Haftorah of Chayesora, V'amelech David Zokein Bo Bayomi V'yechasu B'Vegodim V'Liyeicham Loi V'akshu Nar Amelech Nairu B'Sulo, she should be Seichenes as Amelech. And they found somebody called Avishag Ashunamis. She was the woman who was used to as a Seichenes to the Melech David, who was Zokein Babayom. Then the Gemara speaks about in the very end of the second parak in Sanhedrin, the Gemara speaks about a Melech, that nobody's allowed to be Mishtamish, B'Sharvito Shel Melech, Hu B'Klei Tashmisha Shel Melech, nobody could use a king's residuals, whether it's his wife or any one of his utensils, are forbidden to be used by anybody else but another melech. So the Gemara comes along and says that Avishag Hashunamis, who was used ever Seichenes to warm up the king, was mutar for Shlomo, but was also for Tanach-Yehoshua. You know the whole story. Shlomo was a king. The Gemara says why? Because Be'emes, she wasn't Eishes Melech. He never married her. And it was never Boaleo. But she only used as Seichenes to warm up the Melech. So mainly it's called Klei Tashmisha Shel Melech. So Shlomo, who was a Melech after David, is allowed to use it. Allowed to use her. But Adoniob and Chagis, who challenged the Melucha, cannot use it. Says the Gemara story. The Gemara says that when Avisha came into David HaMelech, she tells him, marry me. Could you please marry me? Omroloi, she wants him to marry him. Omaloi, asirasli, you usher to me. Omralei, chasdei, two gersos in the Gemara, legave nafshe l'shlomo nokit. Right? He says, I'm not going to marry you. Why? Because a king has a limitation of 18 wives. David exceeded the limit. As the BT telephones say, please top it up. You can't top up the Isur of Yud Ches Noshim. Therefore, he cannot marry her. So she answers him as a Chainish, Datzel Manish Ki Maises. Agane, Vasot Ish Vasegan Venen, Datzel Maisalach. Somebody who doesn't have what to steal anymore, he says, you know what, ich bin a tzaddik mit a pelz, I'm a tzaddik, I don't want a gav anymore, I became a Ish Yosher. Apparently you're too old to get married to a woman, and you cannot marry a woman, you can't function as a man, and therefore you're not married. Miyad, it says, Bat-Sheva walks into the room. What does Bat-Sheva walk into the room? V'ksiv v'tovoi Bat-Sheva el hamelech hachadro Omar Rav Yehuda Omar Rav be'oisa sho kincho Bat-Sheva b'shloishes mapos. Different pshatim in the Rishonim, but David apparently was Baalel 13 times to show that koicha b'moisnov, and the reason he was not marrying Avishag is not because of a lack of koyach hanoshim, but because of his Isser. Says Rashi, where does it say in where does it say that he was Baaleh 13 times? She was Mekaneach 13 mapos. Says Rashi, Shebo alei Yud Midois uMekanachash betashlut etashmish ubemikro ze ksuvim 13 teves v'tovoi Bat-Sheva el hamelech achadro ve'hamelech zoken me'oid ve'Avishag ashunamis mishores es hamelech. Well, if you count the words in the pasuk, if the word Bat-Sheva were to be spelled with 2 words, Sheva, there were 14 words in the pasuk. Being that the Gemara says that he was Mekaneach b'shloishes mapos, so 13 mapos, is a raya that the name Bat-Sheva is spelled with 1 name. So the Goyen Kedar Koi Bakodesh was Mekatzer and said, Tomachti yesedoisai b'shloishes tevos. I'm supporting my evidence to say that the name Bat-Sheva is spelled with 1 word and not with 2 words. Otherwise, it had to be 14 mapos, and the story said 13 mapos. Ad kan hamaise hamuvo besefer kol liyo. It's even printed up today in the Goyen al Teiro, and in the back they want the full volume Hasholim, and so on and so forth. And the truth of the matter is that I've seen the word brought down b'shem others as well, but Mora the Shmaise is the story with the B'chaim Volozhin and the Goyen. Tomachti is Yedoisa b'shloishes teves. Question is, today you don't have to be a super genius. Everything is computerized. You Google in, you type in Oitzer HaChochmeh, or you go into Mifal HaShas, whatever program you use. The word Bat-Sheva is mentioned in Tanakh 10 times. Only as to Bat-Sheva, the wife of David HaMelech. All 10 times, it's always spelled in Tanakh. We know that this halacha is not only in Ksubim, but in Sefer Torah, and so in Nevi'im, in Haftorah. If somebody writes 2 words connected, so the 2 words which are connected, if you don't put a separation in it, it becomes possible. Novi also, for Kriya, you have to know a hefsek b'mila l'mila, has to be a revach between a mila and mila. If we were to check all 10 locations in Tanakh, where it says a story about David HaMelech and Bat-Sheva, and so on and so forth till David HaMelech dies, we find always the word Bat-Sheva spelled with, sometimes with a hyphen, sometimes without a hyphen, but nevertheless, it's never 1 word of 5 letters Bat-Sheva, but Bat-Sheva. So the question is, if the Goyen is right, apparently the Goyen is definitely right, why in the world is the word Bat-Sheva in Tanakh always spelled with 2 separate words and not with 1 word as the Goyen Psak? And why don't we ever write, what was the B'chaim Volozhin as ganze Shaila? B'chaim Volozhin that you can't Tanakh. Maybe forgot the Rashi in Sanhedrin Daf Chof Beis, and that's what the Goyen supported him with a raya. But the Chura, we have a poshet, a single raya from the Tanakh. I've been to be Menachem Ovel's of Chaim Kanievsky when his wife Bat-Sheva Kanievsky died. In Tachas Echod Hasifim, he mentioned that when he got married, and was reingegangen by the Chazon Ish, by his uncle, and he was contemplating whether or not what's going to be in his own ksuba. He knew the story. So he asked the Chazon Ish. So Chazon Ish said, "Do given alte Vilna Yid." There was an old man from Vilna who was a Talmud of Rabbi Yisrael Shlover, who was a Talmud of Rabbi Chaim Volozhin, who was a Talmud of the Goyen. And he said, whatever is printed up is incomplete. And the Goyen said weiter, it's not printed, but this is what he said. He said it, it's in 3 or 4 sentences, but I will elaborate since I have a half hour. I'm going to I have 21 minutes left. I'll try to spread it and go on to the next name, and you'll see how the myth and the mystery of names is phenomenal and fantastic. What's the story with this Bat-Sheva? I don't know if anybody has the background, but the background is as follows. David HaMelech stands one day when he's holding a milchama with Bnei Ammon. David HaMelech stands on the roof of his house, on the top of his roof, and he sees this beautiful woman. It says, "Vayisha toiva mara me'oid." He sees this woman from his misrachetzes ve'oilo mitomoso. And to make a long story, the way King David and Bat-Sheva's story goes in the secular books is that David HaMelech sees Bat-Sheva, he falls in love with her from far, she's such a beautiful woman. He asks, who is it? They say she's the wife of Uriah Achiti, who was at that time in the war in Rabat Ammon, in Bnei Ammon. And he calls her to her house, and he's Bo Aleo just because of his cheshek. Thereafter, she calls him back. A couple days later, she says, I'm pregnant. And he knows that he's the father of the child. And she's Eishes Ish. Theoretically, she's an Eishes Ish. So the kid is theoretically should be a mamzer. And he doesn't know what to do. So he goes and he sends the shaliach to the milchama, and he tells Yoav ben Tzruya to please place him in the front line so he should get killed. And if he'll get killed, by that time, nobody would know the difference. In any event, before he does that, he tells Uriah to come back home. He tries a different gimmick. It sounds like a terrible story. He calls Uriah, he said, come home, I want to talk to you. He comes home and he tells him, you're very tired to the milchama, why don't you go home and spend some time with your wife? And he says, I can't go home to spend time with my wife as Bnei Yisrael are out in the milchama, where I go home. And he laid down in the Chatzar Melech. The Melech gave him to drink, and he made him drunk. He wanted to make sure that, and when push comes to shove, when the pregnancy will be noticeable, people should say that he is the father and not King David is covering up on himself. When this doesn't work, sends him back and he sends a shaliach, and he tells the shliach, please tell the Sarat Tzova to put him up in the front so he should get killed, and he gets killed. He gets killed, the baby is born, the baby dies, doesn't last. After the Yemei HaNichumim, David marries Bat-Sheva. And when he marries Bat-Sheva, by the way, the Radak brings down a medrash. I never found the medrash. She told him, listen, you see HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't like our affair because he killed the fruit of this affair. So how do I know I'm going to marry to you? You're going to have another child with me. I don't want to have any shaykhs with you. He says, I promise you we'll have a child, and he is going to be the king who will rule after me. And he will be the grandfather of Mashiach ben David. Shlomo HaMelech is the son of David and Bat-Sheva. Now, if we look in the Psukim, okay, and as the first time we find the name Bat-Sheva in the Tanach, it says, Vayisalech al gag HaMelech, Vayar isho bechetzes ma'alagav, Vayisha toiv mara me'oid. Vayishlach David, Vayidro ishlo isha. Vayomer haloi zois Bat-Sheva bas Eliom eshes Uriah Achiti. David says, who is this woman? Vayidro ishlo isha. Vayomer, who is the one who is answering? It doesn't say David is corresponding with anybody. And the Mefarshim Muchetzach, Vayomer dorash la'an shebeiso. Somebody else says Kushi, he had a shemeshamesh. It doesn't say anywhere that there is a conversation taking place anywhere. It says, Vayishlach David Vayidro ishlo isha, Vayomer haloi zois Bat-Sheva bas Eliom. That's question number one. Question number two, what is haloi zois? Haloi, perhaps. What do you mean, perhaps? Zois Bat-Sheva bas Eliom bas Eishes Uriah Achiti. Says the Goyen. And this is the Goyen that you haven't heard. This is the Goyen that I've heard from Chaim Kanievsky, B'Shem the Chazon Ish, who said over, listen to this. Who is Eliom? The father of Bat-Sheva. Who is the father of Eliom? If you look later, people who are familiar with the Psukim in he was the son of Achitophel Agiloini. Achitophel was the very, very big yoyetz of David HaMelech, who was David's right-hand man at a certain time. And later on, for the story with Avshalom, he saw that David did not listen to him and he committed suicide. Achitophel is a yoyetz ad hayoyim hazeh. When people speak about a yoyetzim, they say Zayin Achitophel. The Achitophel was the first Achitophel, was the yoyetz, the advisor, the personal advisor of King David. Bat-Sheva is a daughter of Eliam, who is the son of Achitophel. Okay. So Shlomo HaMelech is a Ureinikel, a great-grandson of Achitophel Agiloini. His mother is Bat-Sheva, his Zayde is Eliam, and his great-grandfather is Achitophel Agiloini. The Gemara comes alone and says in Maseches Shabbos, Kol ha'omer David choto eino elo toyeh. Whoever says David sinned with Bat-Sheva is making a fatal mistake. And I'm not going to go through the whole Gemara in our very, very limited time. What does it mean, eino elo toyeh? But the Gemara says the reason why, because the halacha is kol hayotze lemilchemes beis David kosev gets krisus leishtoi. There was a takana constituted by David that anybody that goes to milchama used to write his wife prior to going to the battle a divorce again. And when he dies, she's divorced retroactively. Why? If he doesn't come back for the milchama, she's divorced. Why? Because you don't want it to be neufel yibum, you don't want it to be aguno. You want his wife to be clean and. So the Gemara says, perhaps if the husband dies later, so retroactively from the time that he went out to milchama, is the wife is not an Eshes Ish anymore. And being that Uriah Achiti was killed later, forget about the fact that David is the one who initiated the back door. The Gemara talks about the din of Ein Shlichut Va'avera from Ve'oisa Harakto Becherev Bnei Amoin, the whole Gemara in the second parak of Kiddushin. But once Uriah died, so the divorce took place retroactively from the Sh'as when Uriah went out to Milchama. So it comes out that when David was Baal Bat-Sheva, she was never an Eshes Ish. This is a Tamtzis HaGemara in Shabbos, Daf Nunvav Amud Aleph, a whole Amud, Rabbi Yochanan, all the different timing to say why David HaMelech was not really, Nosa Nanovi comes and gives them Mishapora. The Gemara comes in and explains everything, whatever happened. But David HaMelech was not Choyte because the get that Uriah Achiti gave his wife Bat-Sheva prior to going to the Milchama, retroactively when he died, was Chalem Afreya from Bish'as that he gave her the get. So it comes out that when David was born Bat-Sheva, she was no longer an Eshes Ish.
But the Eitzah bring him home. The Eitzah bring home.
It's a very good kasha. Tesis frank the kasha. Very good kasha. But since I am limited and I was warned by the Gabbai here that I better finish on time, I will do it in the extraterritorial time if you stay here later with the greatest pleasure. The Gemara, another Gemara. There's a Gemara in Sanhedrin. Actually, we have a Gemara in Sanhedrin. Gemara comes along at the beginning of Perek Ben Sura. The Gemara says, Doivus Arishonim was Moilidim ben Shmoina. How do we know? Gemara comes along. The Gemara comes along. A cotton that was Moilid is one of them. A cotton is Moilid. Cotton, who is Moilid, ain't b'nei nice Ben Sura Umayr, because it says Ki Ish Ben is supposed to be an Ish, and if he's a cotton, the man Doma cotton Moilid, his son cannot become Ben Sura Umayr. More brings rayas that children had, that in Doivus Arishonim they had children before they were bar mitzvah. How do you say cotton and Moilid? More says, Umi no the Doivus Arishonim was Moilid in Leches. Because it says, Anshei Domu Mumirmo Leyechzu Yemeim. And Achitophel called Yomov Shel Achitophel called Shnoisav Shel Doeg Enel Shleishim Ve'arba V'Shel Achitophel Enel Shleishim Ve'Sholosh. There were 33 years of age Achitophel was when he died. Okay, just to help him cope. How old was Shlomo? Often a psukim, just to make a long story short. How old was Shlomo when his Elter Zayde died? Steht in Pasuk, Shlomo by the Levaya from sein Elter Zayde was 7 years of age. So you take off 33, you minus 7, it's 26. In those 26 years, you have to have 3 generations produced. Rashi says, even the Isha Yoledet Leshiva and Chodesh Tahara, so you have 8 months for every generation to be produced, times 3 is 24 months, which is 2 years. You knock off from the 26, 24 years, and you had Shlomo HaMelech was born when Achitophel, Grandpa Achitophel was 26. He was 7 years old. He was born when Achitophel was 26. And by the way, this is the first shidduch that I know about, that the grandfather of the Kali is younger than the Chassid. David HaMelech at that time was much older than Achitophel. Achitophel died at the age of 33. And Bat-Sheva was born, he had 3 generations. Now, Shlomo HaMelech was born, that was after David was together with Bat-Sheva, and she got pregnant, she had a child, and then she got pregnant, the child died, and she got pregnant again, and she had Shlomo, who happened to be 7 years of age when his great-grandfather, Achitophel, was nifter. So it comes out, how old was Bat-Sheva at the time of the story of Bat-Sheva and David? Says the guy, sie given 7 Jahre alt. She was 7, because she was 8 when she had Shlomo, and she was 7 in the story when David HaMelech was born. Says the Goyen, I'm telling you a very, very controversial pshat. Says the Goyen, Vayomer, David came along and asked, and I'll read the pasuk. Vayishlach David vayidash isha. Vayomer, who is saying? Not the Nar, there's no Nar in the story. Vayomer, David is saying, Aloi hi zois Bat-Sheva. This woman is 7 years old. Not Bat-Sheva, her name was Bat-Sheva. And the guy says, how come we don't find any girl by the name Bat-Shmona, Bat-Shalosh, Bat-Chomesh? What's Bat-Sheva? All of a sudden you have a girl Bat-Sheva. Says the guy, Aloi hi Bat-Sheva. She was 7 years old. And he's saying 3 times why I'm allowed to marry her. Bas Eliom. What does he continue to say, Bas Eliom? Because steht in Machlekes Rishonim, Bakaponim, we pass in Shulchan Aruch, that a cotton, shehoilid, if he's moiled as a cotton, he doesn't have a balabatishkeit to marry off his daughter. She's like a yisoima that she could marry off herself. So even if the father Eliam wanted to marry her off, there's no tfisas kiddush. And the midorais, the rabbanon, there's no tfisas kiddush. David comes along and says, Vayomer, Haloi zois Bat-Sheva. There's 3 reasons why I'm allowed to marry her. A, she's 7 years old, she's Ktana, she's not Mekudesh, she's Turiyah. There's no Kiddush in Tesh Sebektan. Bas Eliam, my father was 7 years old, 8 years old when he had her, so he never had ownership to Mekabel Kiddushin for her. And 3, Bas Eishes Riachiti, and Riachiti gave a get retrospectively. So David is the one who is justifying his story. Vayomer Alohi Bat-Sheva. Says the Goya, listen to this. Beautiful.
He was 14 already.
Who was 14? He wasn't 14. He was 14 later, but he was when she was born, he was 7, 8 years old.
Yeah, then 7 years
the
later.
The halacha is that a cotton who is moili, the same thing that cotton shehoili, that is Shulchan Aruch, ain't bnei nasa ben shehoili. 14 right now, it's 15, 16. But at the time when she was born, he never ever owned her because he was a cotton. And the cotton doesn't have a balabatish. Even later, the Gemara says cotton shehoili, his son doesn't become a ben ceremony, even though he was moili. Because in the time that he had it, he was a cotton. Zog the Goyen that the name Bat-Sheva really was Bas-Sheva. She didn't have a name Bat-Sheva. David called it Bat-Sheva, was the Tama Heter. And thereafter, throughout Tanakh, to commemorate the Heter of the story of David and Bat-Sheva, they always call it Bat-Sheva, because that was the story. David HaMelech gave her name Bat-Sheva. This is Yana Bat-Sheva. Every time somebody has 2 names, like when you call Bin Yomin, it says Ben Yomin, but you're supposed to write afterwards, his name is Ben Yomin. So in the Tanakh, it's mentioned the name Bat-Sheva separately, because to commemorate the Heter that she was 7 years of age. But L'maisa, Liba De'emes, today you have to write like all the names who are 2 names with a hyphen together that is spelled together like Bin Yamin. He called him Ben Yamin, and we are spelling it Bin Yamin. And And that's why they go in Paskin, that really, Bat-Sheva, you have to write as one word. Nicht as a Pashat, but this was a Chaim Kanievsky said over, as Bat-Sheva is going to give Bat-Sheva, she given 7 years old. And she was indeed 7 years when David married. This is all fine and dandy as an introduction to my next 6 minutes to go. But here's the question. Vayan Yehoshua bin Nun Meshores Moshe mi Bechura Vayomer Adoni Moshe Kloem. The story of Eldod Umeidod Misnabim B'Machane in Sefer Bamidbar comes along the Medrash Tanchume in Parshat Tetzaveh and says there are 12 things that Moshe is equal to Yehoshua. Moshe was Shamna Alechem Alaglecha Yeshua. Moshe was Mai Mitchamu. Moshe was Herik Sichim V'Heg and so on by Yehoshua. However, we find one distinction between Moshe and Yehoshua. What is the distinction? Moshe died, he was 120 years old. Yehoshua died, he was only 110 years old. He got a punishment, 10 years. Why did he get the punishment 10 years? State in Medrash. The fee, because he said, the Pasuk, Vayan Yehoshua bin Nun Meshores Moshe mi Bechura Vayomer Adoshi Moshe Kloem, Lefi she'omar lifnei Rabbi Achsor Advorim. He said 10 words in front of his Rebbe. That Oynesh, he got the Oynesh that was Ifchisaloi 10 years from his life expectancy, and he lived only 110 years of age. Well, let's take a calculator and read the Pasuk. Vayan Yehoshua bin Nun, Meshores Moshe mi Bechurav, Vayomer Adoni Moshe Kloim. 11 words. The only way to have 10 words is to come along and say that bin Nun is one word. So by Bat-Sheva, she got a teretz. But here is Yehoshua bin Nun, he's the son of Nun. Here is no way in the world that we could combine the word bin Nun to make it into one word. So the emes is that the Izish Halach in Shulchan Aruch that a person is not allowed to call his Rebbe by his first name. And Shulchan Aruch brings down in Yerideo, in Simon and Beis, the Shari Tshuva brings down the Shach that says that's Dafko Befonov, Shaloi Befonov Yolariko. And he says, the Shari Tshuva brings down that some people think Zachan the Shach, even Befonov, you could say, my Rebbe, Rebbe Yankel. You're allowed to mention the Rebbe. He says, what's the raya? He says, because it says, Adoini Moshe Kloem. You see that he said, Adoini Moshe Kloem, and he's mentioned the word Moshe in front of Moshe. Is the raya. The Shach is not writing. You're allowed to call the Rebbe in his first name, even in front of him. Comes along the Oruch Lameir in the Sefer Binyan Sion, and he says that, why does he say Yehoshua said Asar Advar? The beginning of the pasuk is Vayan Yehoshua. It says, it doesn't say, he just said Vayomer Adoni Moshe Kloim. He only said 3 words. Why does he say 10 words? So he says, Be'emes, there were 2 amiras. He found the Sifri, and the Sifri says, I'm quoting, Adoni Moshe Kloim, Omar Riboine Kloim min ha'olam. B'nei Odom shebevasrim b'suro. Says the Aruch LaNer, if you count the words, Vayan Yehoshua bin Nun is the beginning. Vayomer, he said those 10 words, B'nei Odom shebevasrim b'suro zuro. Those are the 10 words. Mainly there's no raya. He really did not say Adoni Moshe Kloim. He said whatever the Lashon of the Sifri was, therefore there's no raya that you're allowed to call your Rebbe in front of him with the proper name. Shtikl Deichel. The Medrash, all the Radal, all the Meforsha Medrash are not noicha to come and say that it means Amleishi Moshe Yetzias Amiko. The pasuk says 10 words, and the only way to go about it is there's 11 words. That's number 1. Number 2, I'd like to ask you a question. What was really Yehoshua bin Nun's father's name? Does anybody know? Sorry? No. That's very simple. I wouldn't ask the question if it would be Nun. If you look in Divrei Hayomim, which is the only place. And you maybe should know it because you're learning here Daf Hayomi or whatever. The Gemara in Eruvin, Daf Samach Gimel, the Gemara comes along and says Yehoshua bin Nun, one of his punishments was he didn't have any children. Why? Because it says in the pasuk Noin Bnoi Yehoshua Bnoi. It doesn't say a further generation to Yeshua. Zariah Yehoshua didn't have any children. But the name of the father of Yehoshua was not Nun, but Noin with a Cholom. So the Minchas Shai, if you look in Divrei Hayomim, the Meforsheh of this, it says We find Nun in the Torah, we find it's called Yeshua bin Nun, not Noin. Divrei Hayom was the most reliable, historical, chronological, name, support, source. It says his name was Noin and not Nun. So I would like to suggest as follows, and I think it's La'amita Shel Torah. The Ramban, how many times did the name Yeshua mentioned in the Torah? Anybody has any knowledge? The name Yeshua in the Torah appears 28 times. The first 5 times is called Yeshua. All of a sudden, in Parshas Kisisa, it says, "Umishor so binun nar leyomish mitoicha oil." So first time, and from thereafter, Yeshua is called either Binun or Yeshua Binun. The first 5 times, in next week's Sedra, in 2 weeks from now, in Parshas Beshalach, Yeshua is not mentioned with his father's name. The first time his father rises up is in Parshas Vayomer Umishor so binun nar leyomish mitoicha oil. I would like to quote a Ramban. Vetam binun bo bechirik tmuras segoil. The Ramban is, perhaps he has a question, why is called Yeshua bin Nun with a chirik and not ben Nun? So he says, because we find the Yutam Ogu bin Yeke, Shebin Laila Hoyo bin Laila Ovad Bayoino, in bin Akoy Sarosho. The Torah has tendency of swapping the segol that's supposed to be segol, if it's samuch, to make it into a chirik, that's called bin Nun. Says the Rambam, V'ani choish, v'adayin tomea li, madua lo nimlat b'shem hatzadik hazeh echod shiyova keminan. Fine. 23 times it says in the Torah Yeshua bin Nun, and 1 time should say ben Nun. It said bin Nun, always bin, which is not a common language, it's ambiguous language. Zog der Rambam, V'ani choishev ki noagu likroi soi ken lekovoid. כי הויו הגודל בתלמידי משה רבינו ויקראו לוי בינון כלומר הנובוין כי אין נובוין וחכם כמוהו. Says the Ramban, the reason why he's not called Yeshua ben Nun but bin Nun is because he was the greatest Talmid of Moshe. The word binun is miloshen bina. Ki ein chacham he was the biggest Talmid of Moshe Rabbeinu. So throughout the Torah, I'll tell you very simple. In the first 5 times Yeshua is mentioned, he's being there as a supporter to Milchemes Amalek. He's not there for the Talmud Torah for Moshe Rabbeinu. He's here as a support, as a shamish of Moshe Rabbeinu, of Mishoras of Moshe Rabbeinu, to help him fight the war. The first time Yeshua is there to be considered as a Moshe Rabbeinu's Talmid is in this pasuk, Mishos benun yar lo yomish mitoich ha'oyel. There he's called Binun, and the word Binun means the Navoin, not Binun, the son of Nun. His father's name was not Nun, his father's name was Noin, as it says in Divrei Hayom. So we have to say, if you want to be Yekish, you have to say either Yeshua ben Noin or Yeshua Binun, whereas Binun means the Navain, according to this Ramban's terminology. It comes out that Yeshua's name is really Yeshua ben, if it's spelled with a segel Noin. His father's name was not Nun, was Noin. And wherever it's mentioned in the Torah, the Ramban says this is the Emes. Whatever, I wouldn't say it myself, it's the Ramban's word. Wherever it says Yeshua Binun means Yeshua Hanavoin, and he is Bin Nun, he is Mela. The word Binun is in essence not 2 words, but 1 word. Therefore, in the pasuk, in the very first pasuk, where it says Adoni Moshe Klod Vayan Yeshua Binun, and the Medrash says that Tanach-Yehoshua, because of these 10 words mentioned in the pasuk, that's why Yeshua lost 10 years and he was short of Moshe, is because this pasuk also, although in the Torah it's spelled as 1 with a hyphen or with a hafsaka in between, but the word Binun, says the Ramban, it's in essence 1 word, Binun, the Novain, Achacham Talmidei Moshe. What do we have up, just to wrap up in a nutshell? Bat-Sheva, as the Goyen says, is 1 word. It's not 2 words. Bat-Sheva is 1 word. And this is the pasuk of Bat-Sheva, who is the wife who was Mekaneach 13 times, it says in the Pasuk 13 words, that's the Suyas HaGemara in Sanhedrin. At Kedekacha, the Goyim Paska, that in the Ksubin and the Get, you have to write the name Bat-Sheva. Bat-Sheva is one word. The reason why in Tanakh all 10 times is spelled Bat-Sheva is because she was, according to the Goyim, 7 years of age in the Maaseh David and Uriah, in Eshes Uriah Chiti. So she was called Bat-Sheva, she was 7 years old, as the Gemara in Sanhedrin says, and that's why to commemorate the heter of David, that he was never chata, he was called Bat-Sheva. But the real Bat-Sheva is one word. Yeshua Binun, Yeshua is Ben Noin. Anytime it's mentioned in the Torah, Yeshua Binun is not Binun, the son of Nun, at least according to the Ramban's terminology, I'm not saying it in the Torah, is Yeshua Binun, Yeshua Hanovain. Therefore, in the Pasuk, which because of that Pasuk, the last 10 years, we only count 10 words and not 11 words. If I may wrap it up with one sentence to go. I want to give you a bracha. The typical bracha you give a person, when you Gesegnetsach, you come to a birthday, he says, bis 120. Wo kommt 120? Wo kommt 120? It says, it says after the Bible. It says, Moshe Rabbeinu, so different people speak bis 120. Different people say different sources to the bracha bis 120. Moshe Rabbeinu lived 120, he was Aish, Moshe, he was the greatest man, like Hambi Yisrael, Moshe. I would like to offer my own suggestion, and this is my chestnut you can take with you out of the fire. When Bat-Sheva walks in to David, and she tells him, look what's happening outside. Adonio ben Chagis, he's trying to take over the Melucho. And she's coming to cry. He says, you promised me that my son Shlomo, he's going to be the one who takes over. She came to visit him at the day that he died. And the promise that Shlomo Yimloich Tachto was a promise given on the day of his death. There's the Gemara. And the Gemara says that really David HaMelech did not have any life expectancy when the pre-plan prior to Brias Ha'olam. And Adam HaRishon, who was supposed to live 1,000 years because it says Ke'elef Shonim B'nechel Ke'yoy Mesmol, made a contribution, a tax-deductible contribution, and he gave him 70 years of his life expectancy, 70 years, and he gave over the 70 years to David HaMelech. And therefore, Adam died at the age of 930, and David died at the age of 70. This is all Gemara, it's all Chazal. At that day, the last words Bat-Sheva tells David, V'atoimer yechi Adoni HaMelech David le'olam. Gemara says, every time it says le'olam, so on the 70th birthday, Bat-Sheva, who is giving a bracha to David, who is Malchusa Kayemes La'ad David Melch Yisrael Chai V'Kayom, she's telling him, Yechi Adoni HaMelech David Le'olam, please, I give you a bracha, she'll live another 50 years. 70 plus 50 in my math is 120. So the bracha of bis 120, one who initiated the bracha, was the Bat-Sheva who gave a bracha bis 120.